I'd said within the last week that the GOP basically had two things they were interested in over the past few months. That is stopping people from voting and attacking the trans community. I guess they took that challenge because now they've got a third, and I'm kind of wishing they would just go back to those others or maybe go to sleep for a while. Tennessee's GOP-controlled Senate passed a bill yesterday that would require medical providers to bury or cremate fetal remains after abortions, sending the legislation to the governor's desk. And I have not been able to get a read yet on whether it's likely to be signed, but this is America, so why not? Sure, that is what the government should be doing. Forcing women who've been through an abortion to deal with their medical providers, or, and we'll get into some of the details here. According to the bill, certain medical providers must dispose of fetal remains from surgical abortions by cremation or burial, like an actual burial. Like, like burials you've seen. No matter when this happened, no matter how early in the pregnancy, because that doesn't matter. This isn't about anything medical or scientific. This is about being as cruel as possible to women, increasing the net amount of suffering that women have to experience if they exercise their constitutional rights. We'll give more details, but Bridget, what do you think about this?
I think it's horrible. I think it's some of the most disgusting, horrible legislation that you could ever imagine. And I think we need to be clear that this kind of legislation, it hurts poor women, it hurts women of color, it hurts Black women. It only hurts people who are, it disproportionately hurts people who are already marginalized. And so I wanna be clear about that. But I completely agree with you. This is about controlling women, controlling our body, and putting barriers for us accessing our constitutionally protected right to an abortion. And so, I also think it's really important to note that this is not isolated to one state. As you said, we've seen this kind of legislation coming all over the country. And so I think that this really is something that we should all be paying attention to because it's really horrible.
Exactly. No, you're 100% right. There's been, let's see, Indiana was the first back in 2016. And since then, at least 10 other states have had similar requirements, though legal challenges persist. But look, the Indiana law was upheld by the US Supreme Court back in 2019. And why not? It has a conservative majority. Remember, like in 2016, when we were saying that elections have consequences and the Supreme Court matters? It does in a lot of different ways. It bears rotten fruit, like allowing this law to continue. And think about how needlessly cruel it is, not just adding an extra layer to what you have to go through, extra costs as well. And they've continually tried to make exercising your reproductive rights as expensive and difficult as possible. But burial and cremation, like sure, they're very common as ways to dispose of remains here, but they're also wrapped up in culture and religion. Not everyone in America follows the same traditions for things like death and how that's supposed to be managed. But no, you will have to, because you'll be shocked to find out that virtually every Republican pushing for this in Tennessee does agree on religion. They are Christians. And as was pointed out in our document, Governor Lee, who's very anti-abortion, driven by a particular sort of repressive, regressive Christianity, which is almost always vigorously opposed to women living, experiencing life. And so they found a way to really combine all of their interests into one horrendous piece of legislation that, if it ever gets overturned, it could take literally decades to remake the Supreme Court into something that would get rid of this thing.
Yeah, I saw one of the Republican lawmakers who was in support of this legislation saying, when someone gets an abortion, the remains, they just go into the medical waste. Isn't that horrible? I'm curious if these kinds of people, are they up in arms about other kinds of medical waste, or is it just when a woman gets an abortion? Like this kind of idea that they're so concerned with what happens to these remains. I think it's so disingenuous, and I also think it's just needlessly cruel. If you're a woman who's had to unfortunately bury a child, this is something that they're legislating, this kind of cruelty and forcing women to do this in order to just get access to abortion. I think it's really, it's cruel. There's not another, I can't think of another word to describe it. It's hurtful and it's cruel.
Yeah, it's hurtful and it's cruel and it's purposefully cruel. I mean, that's the Republican Party. It is weaponizing cruelty to get what they want. Whether it's tearing families apart at the border, needlessly making things more difficult for women who are undergoing something that probably for them is gonna be one of the hardest things they've dealt with. That's what they do. And a lot of their voters very much like it.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.